Good afternoon. I'd like to thank all of you for participating in Colombia's World Leaders Forum. Today we are honoured to welcome Herman Van Rompuy, President of the European Council. I'd like to begin by thanking Donald and Vera Blinken, the Donald and Vera Blinken European Institute, for co-sponsoring this talk. The Blinken Institute is the oldest organisation in the US devoted to the study of Europe. The Institute's sophisticated specialists have had a hand in shaping the Marshall Plan, NATO, Cold War security, and more recently the creation of the European Union. Colombia's World Leaders Forum, launched by President Bollinger a decade ago, reflects this university's core values and our belief that only through informed and open dialogue will solutions emerge to society's most difficult problems. Since 2003, Colombia has been fortunate to host a tremendous variety of presidents and prime ministers from around the world. This week, we are scheduled to have 11 heads of state come to Colombia, the largest number to speak here during the annual September convening of the UN General Assembly. Herman Van Rompuy, the former Prime Minister of Belgium, was chosen in 2009 by Europe's leaders to become the first permanent President of the European Council. Last year, he was reappointed to what would be his second and final term. In his home country, Mr. Van Rompuy held the posts of Budget Minister and President of the Parliament's lower house. While he is an economist by training, it certainly bears mentioning that President Van Rompuy is also a published poet with a book of haiku to his credit that has been translated from his native Flemish to French, German, English and Latin. As the European Council's President, Mr. Van Rompuy leads a body comprised of the heads of state of the 28 member countries. The Council he leads is responsible for setting the political direction and priorities of the European Union. His job is undeniably a daunting one, demanding that consensus emerge from a group defined by national and ideological differences. In recognition of the importance of this work, last year President Van Rompuy accepted the Nobel Peace Prize along with European Commission President José Manuel Barroso and European Parliament President Martin Schulz for the European Union's contributions to the advancement of peace and reconciliation, democracy and human rights in Europe. As the Nobel Committee and many others have recognised, the striking contrast between the pandemic violence that plagued Europe through much of the 20th century and the relative peacefulness of the years since the formation of the European Union warrant both the world's recognition and a commitment to continuing on this path. Because of this progress, the continent's economic challenges have been allowed to move to centre stage, and they are substantial. The current period, characterised by high unemployment and very uneven growth across the nations of the Union, must come to a close. Yet, turning the page on these problems spawned by the global financial crisis remains elusive somewhat 5 years later. In addition, the Union faces a series of critical questions about its membership, ranging from Britain's future in the EU to Turkey's inclusion. Underlying each challenge is a tension familiar to all of us since the inception of the European Union and before. How can a confederation of nations balance the demands of sovereignty against the necessity of sustained, cohesive action? Can the project of a united Europe succeed in overcoming problems of historic dimension and ensure a prosperous and peaceful future? The determined efforts of President Van Rompuy and many others give us hope that these challenges will be met successfully. The title of his talk today is The State of the European Union, Politics, Economy and Democracy. As we listen, it is worth keeping in mind that Europe's problems aren't so different from those we face here in the United States. For in a global society, problems rarely respect regional or national boundaries. As I said at the outset of this introduction, it is only through open and honest discussion that new remedies are developed to society's most persistent problems. We are honoured that Colombia is able to provide a forum for just this kind of debate. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to European Council President Herman Van Rompuy.
Well, rather than having President Van Rompuy give a talk in a formal sense, what we wanted to do today is organize a conversation. I'm Victoria de Grazia. I'm a professor of history at Columbia University. I'm also the director of the Blinken European Institute. And this is just an extraordinary occasion for us to welcome you here into our own pantheon. You don't have to go to Rome anymore. The United States provides even this. Now, one of the questions that comes up almost right away for Americans who are used to a strong executive, elected, always in some ways in our face, whether we like him, which I do, or loathe him, is a sense of the faceless Eurocrat. This is a kind of American myth. And I was very struck. Friends in Japan and Belgium did indeed mention that the first time that you sort of gave yourself a very strong public presence, very distinct, was indeed publishing your book of haiku. Now, was that meant to be a political statement? We don't usually associate.
No, I'm chairing the European Council. So the European Council gathering 6-7 times a year the leaders of Europe, presidents and prime ministers. So I'm chairing that meeting. I'm not the president of Europe. I'm the president of the European Council. It makes a lot of difference. I'm elected all my life, but this time I have only 26 voters. I was re-elected by 27. My successor will be elected by 28, and that's all. That's all. So you can compare this function with the functions of the President of the United States or any other function. Because in my own country I'm a hero. In my own country they call me President of Europe. I never say the opposite. If somebody says something positive on you, never contradict them. It is so rare, so seldom, that you have to cherish that moment.
But sometimes I think there's been confusion here because there's also President Barroso, the President of the European Commission, and then we say, is there a rivalry? Is this all necessary? What's the difference?
But that's in some way it's rather easy to understand. Each country, but we are not a country, but each country has an executive power, a president in the United States, a head of state, let's call it a head of state, as a better. They have some kind of government in most of European countries, and they have a parliament. In the United States you have a presidential system. But in most of the European countries you have the three of them. So the European Council in some way has the functions of a head of state. And I'm chairing a collective body, but that collective body is, as a group, the head of state. The European Commission is the government. And as every country, but again we are not a state, we have a parliament. So we have the three functions, and that's not unusual, it's very common. It's very common. I know that those who try to make a caricature of the European Union, they say it is very complicated. It is very easy. Let's say that I'm more a president, President Barroso is more a prime minister, and then you have the parliament, as simple as that.
One of the problems that that you face, particularly now that there's a European crisis, and there's been, to call it Euroscepticism doesn't do justice to the problems now, is, what is your relationship with public opinion? How do you, extend your effort to create consensus? Is it possible to reach out to a so-called European public opinion, or do you really feel obliged still, insofar as you want to be very, very capable, which you are, to work basically to respect that you are, in a sense, appointed by the members?
Yeah. I'm appointed by the prime ministers and by the presidents. So my first job is to get an agreement among those leaders. And our decision-making process is quite complicated, because we need unanimity. If the president of Romania is not agreeing, we have not an agreement. So we have to work until the 27, now 28, agree. Of course, this is quite a complicated task. Some have even a problem to agree with themselves. So I have to find an agreement. Of course, I come from a country where compromise is our second nature. I chaired a government with 6 parties. Can you imagine? 6 parties. Now I have only 27. And I can go even further. Most of those countries have coalition governments. So when I have the consent of a prime minister, I have the consent of a coalition in that particular country. So when we reach an agreement, for instance on the European budget, which we did, actually it is an agreement among 60 parties all over Europe. All over Europe. So we have to work hard, and that's my core business.
Now, so physically, how do you do this? Do you tug on sleeves? You have your...
I'm still in good shape. For a man of 66.
Compliments.
Try to compliment me. No, it is of course a difficult task. And so your question was, how do you reach out to European public opinion? I would say this is not my main task. That is more the task of the prime ministers and the presidents, because they are elected directly, most of them, by their electorate in their member states, and they have to persuade, to convince their public opinions that the agreements we reach collectively are the good ones also for their country. And that's part of my job and their job. They have to prove in each of their countries that what was decided is in the interest of Latvia, but also in the interest of the European Union, or in the interest of Germany, and in the interest of the European Union. So those interests have to coincide. There's of course the overall European interest, but of course the voters are interested in what is the B for me, what is the added value for me in Latvia or in Germany. And there we have to prove that it's also good for them.
I sense that there is some real compatibility between the haiku and this effort to create these extraordinary combinations. And let me just read one. It's called Brussels. Different colors, tongues, towers, and gods. I search my way. And it's very, very elegant and meaningful.
But the haiku is something very simple. That's only 17 syllables. It's an experience in nature of related to the seasons. And you have to express yourself in simple words and something that you easily can understand. So it is some kind of antidotum for all the complicated issues I have to deal with. So I'm fleeing in some way to haiku. By the way, I will publish my second book in October, so I recommend it strongly.
We'll look forward to launching it here, okay, if you want your American. More rebarbative questions. So, with the ending of the pre-election political uncertainty, with Angela Merkel's resounding victory, the question is, what next? It seems that there are a lot of issues addressing the economic crisis, but also the political architecture of Europe, which have been held in abeyance. And so I was wondering from you, what's next after she forms her cabinet, or maybe even before? What kinds of signals are being sent? What kinds of agenda do you see now coalescing as with the election?
Let me say first that the victory of Angela Merkel is quite exceptional. Because in a European, in a crisis, economic crisis, a Eurozone crisis, in a recession, getting a third mandate is almost unprecedented. I give you an example. I was elected or appointed, I let it to your evaluation, in November 2009 by 26 European leaders. I was myself at that time Prime Minister. I voted for myself. But there was not a real vote, and it was a consensus. But from those 26, only 9 left in the European Council. Most of them have to leave, not because they are performing badly, but they had to take measures which are highly unpopular. And in some way they were punished by the electorate. Here Angela Merkel succeeded in winning the election for the 3rd time, and as I said, in the midst of a crisis. Really unusual. By the way, she did it without spin doctors, without a huge communication strategy, without lying. She did it in her own way. And this is a cultural phenomenon of the 1st degree also, that you can be elected in a very important country as Germany by 60 million voters, by an electorate of 60 million voters, without using all those means and of, let's say, the media state in which we are living, on the media society in which we are living. But that's putting aside.
No, I think it's absolutely right to give her this credit for this sincerity, her integrity, but some could argue that it's a vote for austerity for Germany and against Europe. So is what?
You call it austerity, you can also call it sound public finances. That's another way of expressing it. You can't
maybe in the short term, not necessarily in the medium or the long term.
But you can't have on a sustainable way a sound economy without sound public finances and with a high competitiveness. So, and that we discovered too late. We launched the euro, our common currency, without realizing from the start on that if you have a common currency, you need also common policies, and you need sound policies, structurally sound, in public finance and in the economy on competitiveness. So what we are doing now in Europe is more inspired by long-term objectives instead of short-term. We showed also now flexibility in our fiscal policies, giving countries now leeway to achieve the 3% target, the 3% deficit target, what later on than originally scheduled. So we show some flexibility, but on the long term, we agreed not with 10, but with 27, 28 countries. Together we agreed that we are aiming in each of our countries towards balanced budget. Not tomorrow, but let's say over a period of 5, 6, 7 years. That's not a German policy. That's a commonly agreed policy. And it is completely a necessity if you have a common currency. And so there's a misunderstanding. All the decisions in the European Union, in the European Council, are taken by the 27, 28 countries together. Of course, some countries play an important role, and some even more than others. But at the end of the day, at the end of my meeting, I have to get the agreement of all of them. And we did it all the time during the last 3 years.
But in this case, I mean, in the case of Germany, it has a valence, a strength in the market that is far greater than being won amongst equals. So the question comes down, and I know this is something you're dealing with all the time, can you imagine a different balance between austerity and solidarity, such that we've been looking at up to now? I mean, these are questions that Americans are debating all the time for the United States, but also in the case of Europe as well. There's too little solidarity, too little Marshall Plan, too little prospects for a different kind of transfer, a different kind of investment structure among the European states, and that you've got to restructure the architecture to enable different kinds of decision making.
Yeah. I answered your question, in my view, on austerity. I call it more sound public finances over the longer term. On solidarity, I know I know the issue. I come from a country where solidarity is in the heart of the public debate. Are the Flemish people paying too much for the balloons or not? And when you are only with two in a country, you always know who is receiving and who is those who made the donations. So we use the word transfers. So for me, I was used to that kind of debate in Europe. But again, here, as far as solidarity is concerned, the European Union, until 5-6 years ago, was a win-win situation.
Sure.
Yeah. We created a common market, and we have the biggest common market in the world. 500 million people with high purchasing power, one of the highest living standards in the world. So we created this. Of course, that creates more competition. That creates also what Schumpeter called creative destruction. But overall, it was a win-win situation.
Sure.
And then we launched not for all the countries, but for some countries, a common currency. Not only a common market, but also a common currency. The euro, the Eurozone. And in the beginning, it was also a win-win situation. It changed with the financial crisis. Started here on this side of the Atlantic. And then some of our structural problems in some of our member states came to the surface. Then we discovered that part of the economic growth from the last 10 years was artificial, was based on public debt and on private debt, and we had to correct this. And those countries who were living beyond their means had to correct it. The people is not guilty for it. They were simply badly ruled, malgoverno, as the Italians would say. But we had to correct this. And then we said in the European Union, you go through a difficult period. You have to take measures in terms of fiscal consolidation, restoring competitiveness and so on. And, by the way, you have no access to financial markets anymore because you are not inspiring confidence enough. And we said then, we will help you. We will help you. And so we put at the disposal of those countries 500 billion euros. This is what we call taxpayers' money. It is not a gift. It is a loan, of course. But there is always a risk, or people consider that there is a risk. Taxpayers are considered that there is a risk. But we did it. Also Germany did it. It's a huge contributor. So, in the first period of the European Union, in the common market, and in the first decade of the common currency, there was no need for solidarity. So you can't say there is no less solidarity than before. There was no need for solidarity during a long time. And now we need solidarity.
Certainly in terms of the cap. And, I mean, there was a lot of transfers in the earlier period.
But the European budget, I will not bother you with all the details of our structure, but the European budget is 1% of European GDP. What do you know? The public expenditures in Europe, overall, so local expenditures, regional expenditures, state expenditures, European expenditures, social security, overall, is on average in each of our member states 50%, 50, of their GDP. The European budget is 1% of GDP. So there is a part of solidarity in the European budget, but let's say for 0.4, 0.5. That I don't call real solidarity. But now in the Eurozone crisis, we put at the disposal of those countries under pressure and under program, as we call it, a package of 500 billion. So we showed really solidarity. Was this easy to obtain? No. Of course, they had to go, each of the member states and each of the leaders, to their public opinion and say, we have a common currency. It is in your interest that the euro remains stable and that the euro remains tout court, and that we keep that currency. So it is in your interest, but in the meantime we have to help some countries. And some of the voters in those countries said, why do we need to help the Greeks, the Irish and the others? So there were legitimate questions. And although there was that kind of euro criticism, the leaders defended the option of solidarity. Don't underestimate this effort. And some paid a high price in the elections for this. So there is much more political courage than most people think.
In your Nobel Peace Prize speech, you spoke, of your father's generation experiencing the war, and the fathers that lamented the death of their children. And in some ways, almost with the same voice, you were very worried about a new lost generation, that is the youth of Europe, the NEETs, not in employment, not in education, not in training, and others too are saying that this may be the biggest problem, that this is a generation growing up with very, very high unemployment, with enormous changes in technology going on. Could you tell us some about what the European Council has been doing? I know it supported a summit in July 2013. Again, you get the Carpers, the Economist magazine saying it's not enough, that this is a huge question. And I know it's a question certainly that we talk about in the United States, perhaps with not the same clarity, but then there's also a different. So could you think about that with us for some?
Yeah. First of all what we did, the ultimate aim, the ultimate goal is employment, is jobs. We are not saving the euro because it is the euro. We are not embarking on fiscal consolidation because we like it, but because we think that this is best at the end for prosperity and for jobs. But it is a long-term objective. And you may not forget that in 2 or 3 years' time, the confidence of people was shaken very deeply. First of all, there was the problem of the banks. People had full confidence in the financial sector, and all of a sudden they discovered that banks can collapse. They didn't collapse in Europe, but there was this threat. And then 2 years later, there was the crisis of the currency. Of course, people never thought that this currency could be under pressure or under threat. And you have to understand that this created a crisis of confidence. And now I'm not now speaking not of the countries under program, as we call it, Greece, Ireland, Portugal, in some way Spain. Now I'm speaking about, let's say, the Western European, the Northern European countries. So a big crisis of confidence. When there is a lack of confidence, people don't consume and don't invest. So we have to restore confidence first. And that's what we did. The existential threat on the Eurozone is over. A year ago, right now, in September, still the discussion was going on, not if the Eurozone would collapse, that was for sure. The only discussion was about the date. This discussion is completely over. So we saved the euro, we saved the eurozone. The eurozone is not under existential threat anymore. But there is a time lag between the restoration of confidence and the beginning of spending by consumers and investors. So beginning of economic growth. And there is a time lag between economic growth and jobs and employment. It took more time than we thought. The crisis was deeper and it took us more time to overcome the crisis. So we have now in 27 countries, with one country missing, Cyprus, but in 27 countries we will have positive economic growth next year. And we will have the beneficial impact of it on the employment market a little bit later. But we can't wait. And that's why we said we have to, in the meantime, we have to take specific measures at the level of the member states and at the level of the Union and the Eurozone to combat youth unemployment. And the aim is to give to every youngster, after having left school or getting unemployed, to give him in 4 months' time a training, an apprenticeship, or an offer for a job. It's a huge task. We already reached out to 800,000 young people in Europe with those programs.
How did you do that? Through the national governments?
National governments, yeah. That competence is national government. We are supporting this from the European budget with 8 billion. With 8 billion euros, but it's mainly the task of national governments or in some countries regional governments or local governments. But just one detail, and I don't underestimate the problem, not at all. I'm not trying to downplay it, but you have to have a sharp look also to the statistics. I know that in some of the countries you have youth unemployment levels of 50 or 60%. But if you have a closer look to it, if you only count those who are not employed, not in an education, not in training, for instance in some of the countries with an unemployment rate among the youngsters of 50%, it is 18%, which is already huge. But not to the extent that those figures try to show. So it is a huge problem. The ultimate goal of all what we are doing is growth and employment, but via specific targeted measures we try to give a perspective for those young people in the meantime.
So there was also an increase in the Erasmus, the student mobility.
But that was already before the crisis, and that's a structural program, so that people can travel all over Europe and to know each other, of course with the means of the cheap
Ryanair
tickets. So this is completely different compared to my youth, which is very close. Very close.
Change of topic. Of course, we've been very worried in many ways about gas, the use of gas in Syria, the intervention, the civil war in Syria. The European Union has been less, shall we say, conspicuous than it was, let's say, in the time of Libya. And I wondered if you could let us understand the thinking about how to provide, what kind of support to end the civil war.
Of course, you can't compare Libya with Syria. Two completely different countries located in different parts of the world. We took our responsibilities in Libya. Gaddafi was at the brink of invading Benghazi, and we live in Europe under the trauma of Srebrenica. So there is this town in former Yugoslavia where thousands of people, men, boys, most of them were killed. by extremists. And we have not forgotten this. And we saw that this could happen also in Benghazi. That's why the French, the British, helped by a lot of other Europeans and supported by the Americans, took this initiative of launching an attack on Libya in March 2011, so that there would be no second Srebrenica in our neighborhood. Syria is a totally, as I said, a totally different world, much more complicated in the most dangerous region of the world. Unfortunately, the United Nations Security Council couldn't find a political solution for this problem during 2 years. One of the paradoxes of the last weeks is that after this inhumane crime, attack by chemical weapons, after this there are now more possibilities, apparently and hopefully, for an understanding between the main players in the UN Security Council. As Lincoln once said in his famous Gettysburg speech, that this death shall not have died in vain. You always die in vain. But I still remember this speech and knew it by heart when I was a young man. But that this chemical attack and all the people killed in this chemical attack can create something positive also. And if there is now an understanding, or can be an understanding between the main players, this can be the beginning of a process, not only on chemical weapons, but also on a lasting solution for the Syrian crisis. And the European Union is very supportive for this approach. We defend it from the start on a political solution. There is no military solution whatsoever for the Syrian crisis. But of course, we need a political will. And those who are close to the government of Syria and those who are more close to the opposition have to urge those who are fighting to come to Geneva and to talk and negotiate.
Do you think that Europe is more divided than it was on Libya?
In Libya it was not simple. Because some of the most important countries were in the beginning not convinced, and after discussions in the European Council, by the way, and the week after this European Council in March 2011, we were all on the same line. Here in Syria, we defended all the 28 a political solution, and even if some of them thought on a military attack, I have to say that the 5th of September in Vilnius, Lithuania, the 28 Ministers of Foreign Affairs had agreed on a common position, saying that we have to wait first on the report of the UN inspectors, and that we have to work in the UN framework. I know that afterwards the events developed in another way, but in the 5th of September we had a common position in the midst of the debate on military attack. But the European Union is not only active politically, the European Union is the biggest donor for humanitarian aid. And we are providing now 1.5 billion help support for the people, for the governments in Turkey, in Jordan, and in Lebanon, and we stand ready to do more, because we have now 2 million refugees outside Syria. If the trend of the last months continue, we will have 3.5 million by Christmas. And let's hope that we find in the meantime a political solution for the crisis. But on the humanitarian side, the European Union and its member states are the biggest donors. By the way, We are the biggest donor for development aid in the world. Half of development aid in the world is provided by the European Union and its member states.
Truly soft power, because what, you know,
it is soft power, yes. We are not the Florence Nightingales, but we are simply helping people. And I am pretty sure how history will judge us.
That dimension. I probably don't have time for more than one question. Do I? I don't have my glasses, so I can't see the sign language back there. But okay, so this sounds like a very boring question. The transatlantic alliance, especially I'm interested in the effort to launch new trade agreements. Now, it strikes me that that's not about lowering tariffs, because tariffs between Europe and the U.S. are pretty low, but rather about regulatory differences. And certainly one regulatory difference has to do with the whole question of how very big organizations, Oracle, Google, etc., use surveillance and collect big data. And I wondered if you had some thoughts about the way big data is collected and, you know, etc.
I don't think that is part of the TTIP negotiations, but I have sufficient problems to not elaborate on this issue. But the European Union is not the only target. I listened this morning carefully to the Brazilian president. I would say that no European leader would pronounce that kind of speech, but there is a lot of uneasiness all over the world about all this. But let's say we have set up two working groups, European Union and the United States, clarifying this topic. In one of those, the European Commission is involved, and the other is only the member states are involved. So we are still in speaking terms on this issue, but it is a highly sensitive issue in our countries. And don't forget that some of our member states left only 20 years ago systems in which everybody was spying everybody. Of course, this is not comparable with what was the usual practice in those member states, but there are still the remainders of that feeling. So this kind of problem is particularly sensitive, and between the United States and the European Union, we are trying to clarify this so that we are, both of us, more at ease. But as I said, the European Union is not the only target in the world.
President Van Rompuy, I think we should open up to questions. We have just a wonderful audience here, and then at the very end, I think you might want to, wrap this up with lots of considerations. So let's see how questions, and then let's see. So I will just start in and perhaps collect a couple. Would you? Yes. Do you want to speak in the mic? I think my understanding is that you go to the mic and speak, that you probably have to line up, in fact. So why don't you, since I saw her hand first and didn't understand. And in the meantime, would you...
Is that all?
These are... the line now goes out the door. Go ahead, sir.
Hello, my name is Pierre. I'm a French and Belgian citizen.
We're going to weed you out. One.
I have a small question regarding asylum seekers and human rights. Many NGOs talk about human rights violation in the detention of asylum seekers in certain European countries, particularly southern European countries. And I was wondering, what does the European Council try to do to rectify the situation? Basically.
You're speaking about detention of some asylum seekers.
Yes.
I don't know if you are referring to a particular situation, a particular country, or so on. But detention is a competence of the member states. We in the Union, we agreed finally on, let's say, minimum standards for asylum seekers, so the conditions in which we accept them or not accepting them in the country. But you know, because you are French Belgium, that those issues are in the heart of the public debate in each of the countries. So the member states are very keen to keep this among their competencies. It is already quite an achievement that we get an agreement on minimum standards, not for detention, but for the way we accept applications of asylum seekers or not. But on detention, it is a competence of the member states.
Yes.
I'm not avoiding the problem, I try to describe how it is.
Thank you so much for speaking with us today. Back to the trade deal, I was curious, what do you think would be the major benefits from the EU-US trade deal currently being negotiated?
But trade is the biggest engine for growth and for jobs in general. And if the two main trading blocs in the world can agree, as you said, on more harmonizing non-tariff standards and regulations, then, and this is beneficial for trade for half of the world economy. So trade is an engine for growth. You don't need fiscal deficits, you don't need spending money, but by reorganizing trade and having more trade flows among those big economies as the economy of the European Union and the United States, you create more prosperity and more jobs. That's the big aim.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
My name is Jacob Johnson, and I'm a freshman in Columbia College. And my question is regarding the unification of Europe. Clearly, over the last few decades, Europe has become more and more united. And my question for you is whether you will support or resist further attempts to unify Europe. Some even talk about a United States of Europe. And what positive benefits do you see of unifying Europe further in terms of dealing with issues like corruption and distribution of wealth and further dealing with climate change? And what negative ramifications do you see, like maintaining diversity, and how would you deal with those negative ramifications? Thank you.
So, first of all, Europe is still expanding. We accepted Croatia as the 28th member state in July. And we have countries which are candidate countries, and hopefully with some of them we start very soon negotiations. With some of them we are even negotiating. And it's a very happy thing. Why? Because it shows that we are still attractive. The European Union, by the way, is still sexy, because a lot of people want to join the club. The President of the European Council, he is sexy, that's for sure. But also the European Union. So that's first, we are still expanding. But we are also deepening the unification process, especially in the Eurozone. I mentioned it briefly. We organized a common currency, so we set up a common currency, but we forgot that we need also a lot more common policies. And the last 3 years, during the Eurozone crisis, we had to build a completely new architecture to have a stronger governance of the Eurozone collectively. So we are deepening the integration in the Eurozone, not all over the Union, but in the Eurozone, 17, 18 countries now. So we are widening and deepening the integration, step by step. Don't ask me what the Union will be in 10, 20 or 30 years. That's not my problem. We'll see. It will never be the United States of Europe, never. Because each of our countries has its own history, its own identity, and they will never give it up. We also have 24 languages in Europe. So it will never be comparable with the United States of America. We will have a union, but it will always be a very particular one, a very specific one, adapted to our history and our geography.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Borja Chañez. I'm a second-year MBA student from Spain.
Master of Business.
Yeah, although I did my Erasmus in Brussels, so I will always be grateful to the European Union for that. My question is regarding Spain. What is your view on the structural changes that the government is making in Spain? And do you think they will be enough, or would you like to ask Mariano Rajoy for another round of more structural reforms? Thanks.
You can imagine, if I make comments on what's happening in each of our member states, I can give up my job immediately. But the former government, Spanish government, under the leadership of José Luis Zapatero, and the current government of Mariano Rajoy made tremendous efforts, structural efforts, to rebalance the Spanish economy, to get rid of huge public but huge private debt. And so Spain is a good example in some way of artificial growth during the first years of the Eurozone. They have to correct this with a very high price, very high price. So in some way I admire their courage, although they cannot show results yet. But also in Spain we see the first clear indications of renewed economic growth, not yet on the labour market. But Spain is a good example of a readjustment process, a very harsh one, but an inevitable one. But I know the sufferings of the people, but they were very badly ruled during years and years, and the current governments have the very difficult task to correct this. But don't ask me what they have to do and make an assessment in a detailed assessment of what they have done. I will only say they were very courageous in very difficult circumstances.
Thanks. Thank you.
Hi, this is Kate Benner, law student. I'd like to return to the issue of the US-EU TTIP. In particular, you identified some of the benefits that could come out of agreeing upon increased trade. Can you identify some of the sticking points in reaching such an agreement and how the US and the EU can sort of work their way through?
I am the President of the European Council, and really I'm not a candidate to negotiate that kind of agreement. I leave this to my compatriot, EU Commissioner de Gucht, happened also to be a Belgian, ready to compromise, as always. We even try to find compromises even when it is not needed. But that is his task. I know that there are big and difficult issues. They are now in an exploratory phase, and I think in 3-4 months' time we will see what the real difficulties are. The optimists say that we can find solutions for the problems within a period of 2 years. We'll see if this is doable. But we have a lot of issues, and I will not go into any detail, a lot of issues which will need really the art of compromise. I have not answered your question, I know it, but it is a very ambitious negotiation, but it is doable.
Hello.
My name is Cody Smith. I'm a master's student of negotiation. My question is, what is your vision of Europe over the next 50 or 100 years?
I have no vision for the upcoming 50 no, even that not. There's a famous German chancellor who said, "Those who have visions have a problem," he said.
I've taken their medicines. Yeah. Okay, let me take one more here. Over here. Yes, sir.
Hello. Good afternoon, sir. First off, I want to thank you for take time out of your trip to come and visit and speak with us. My question regards Turkey. Prior to your position as President of the European Council, your views on Turkey were well documented. In light of events, both the Turkish government's response to protests earlier this year, as well as events in Europe's near neighborhood, in which Turkey is a large player, I was wondering, I'm curious whether your opinion on the issue of Turkey and full EU membership has changed substantially from before.
So Turkey is a candidate country that was decided in 1999. We start negotiations with Turkey, I think, in 2005 or 2006. And those negotiations were blocked, I think, 1 year or 2 years ago. The last chapter that was opened was under Belgian presidency, and that is the second half of 2010. So during almost 2 years, the process of negotiation was interrupted. I went to Turkey in May. I had good talks with the Prime Minister and with the President of the Republic, the government, and there were good hopes that we can open 1 or 2 chapters in the negotiation. Chapters is a specific topic on which we try to agree because countries have to comply with targets in order to get an agreement on accession. So those chapters, we hope that we could open 1 or 2 chapters in the upcoming months. And then came the incidents you mentioned. And this made the complex relationship even more complex. But we decided in the European Council of the end of June to open 1 additional chapter under certain conditions, but that those conditions can be met, so that we decided to open a chapter 22, so that the process of negotiations can start again. But Turkey, as I said, it is not a candidate country as all others, but it is important that the negotiations can restart, because with that kind of country, very successful economically, compared to many other countries, a democratic country, it is important that we keep that close relationship. We will see where the negotiations will bring us, if we can conclude this, but keeping in close contact under the form of negotiations is absolutely key. And so I'm personally strongly in favor of it, and I went to Ankara in May to push it and to give it an additional impetus.
Sir.
Good evening. My name is David. I'm a Spanish graduate student here at Columbia. And my question for you also regards Spain. And it's, what's the position on the European Council on the referendum for Catalonia to gain independence from Spain? And what would be the repercussion if it did gain independence in 2014?
I learned a harsh lesson in politics. Never answer hypothetical questions. Never. Because there's no end on it. If this happened, what would be your answer, and so on. So I hope that Spain remains a united country. And they have their own procedures, also constitutional procedures, also on referenda. And everybody has to respect those constitutional provisions. But in general, as I said, I don't consider that eventuality of a breaking up of one of the member states. I can say this more easily because I come from a country where separatism is, for some parties, an issue. And I refuse to go deeper into that topic because I'm also, for my country, I'm strongly in favor to keep the country as it is, a federal state, a deepened federal state, even more than that, but still a united country and full member of the European Union.
Thank you. Hi, thank you for coming today. My name is Mia. I'm a senior at the college. You mentioned that a lot of countries still want to join the European Union, and that's a good sign. But there are countries that want to leave the European Union, and I'm referring to the possibility of Britain withdrawing from the European Union. Could you address this, what the implications would be for the European Union if Britain were to withdraw?
You made one mistake. You said some countries want to leave it.
Just Britain.
No, there are some people in Britain who want to leave, but not the country as a whole, not at all. I know it is an issue. Of course it is an issue. But we'll see. This is to the British to decide. They have to make up their mind. There are some proposals for organizing a referendum, but it is after the elections. And then we have to first to see who is winning the elections. And then you can speak again, if needed, on a referendum. But if you ask me what my strongest wish is, of course, Britain is full part of the European Union, playing a very important role in the European Union, cooperating with us also in this difficult period. We agreed with all the member states, including the United Kingdom, on a European budget, which was not an easy task at all. And they are cooperating with us on deepening and strengthening the Eurozone. And from time to time we need the votes also for those not belonging to the Eurozone, because we have to change laws for the 27 so that we can apply them to the 17 of the 18 of the Eurozone. But we need the support of the United Kingdom, and they gave us that support. So they are a full member, cooperating fully also in those difficult years. And I believe, but that's the British people to make up their mind, that is in the interest of the British people to remain a full member of the European Union. Half of their exports have as destination the other members of the European Union. That's enough as an indication how important the Union is for the British economy.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think we have to close now.
Is the exam over?
Would you like to say some last words in the European exam tradition?
Last words.
Words here in this moment.
I have not prepared any statement, but it was a pleasure to be here, a pleasure to address this audience in this very European style building. And as you said, it is like the Pantheon, but the Pantheon is for the death. Here we are in the midst of life for the youth. And thank you.
I want to thank you so much for this very generous conversation. It was just, we're very, very grateful, and we're going to welcome you back because probably you aren't going to be appointed for a third term. Is that right? So we have another occasion here.
Yeah.
Good.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please remain